The afternoon light came through those windows at exactly 43 degrees. I remember that because I'd arrived early enough to watch it shift across the conference table, watch the shadows lengthen, watch dust particles drift through the beams like tiny satellites in slow orbit around my future. 3:45 p.m., November 14th, senior year. I had my portfolio in front of me. 47 pages, color-coded tabs, 3-ring binder with reinforced edges because I'd been carrying it everywhere for 6 weeks and couldn't afford for it to look worn. Inside, my entire vision for student government restructured as actionable policy, budget proposals with line item breakdowns, timeline charts showing implementation phases, case studies from peer institutions, student survey data I'd collected myself, compiled into graphs and analysis. I thought preparation was armor. I thought if you did the work, really did it, thoroughly and professionally and better than anyone else possibly could, then outcomes were predictable, controllable. I was 17, and I believed the world was fundamentally rational. Let me take you back further. Before that room, before that interview, before everything changed. Because you need to understand who I was, to understand what they took from me, and what I built in the empty space where that person used to be. I grew up in Riverside, a suburb about 40 minutes south of the city. Middle class in the most literal sense, neither struggling nor comfortable, just adequate. Our house was a 3-bedroom ranch built in the 70s, brown siding and a detached garage. Backyard with a swing set my father never got around to taking down, even after I outgrew it. The neighborhood was rows of similar houses, similar families, similar lives unfolding on similar timelines. My father, Theodore Caldwell, was a CPA at Morrison & Associates, a regional accounting firm with offices in 4 states. He worked steady hours, came home at 6:15 every evening, changed out of his work clothes into jeans and a polo shirt, helped my mother with dinner. Weekends he did yard work and watched football. He was reliable in a way that made him almost invisible. You could set your watch by his routines, predict his reactions, count on him to be exactly who he'd always been. My mother, Catherine, taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. 23 years in the same classroom, same bulletin boards she'd refresh each fall with new construction paper borders. Same lesson plans refined incrementally each year. She believed in structure, consistency, clear expectations. Her students loved her because she was fair and warm and created environments where 8-year-olds felt safe enough to try hard things. That was my childhood. Safe, structured, predictable. Dinner at 6:30 every night. Homework at the kitchen table before television. Church on Sundays at First Presbyterian, not because we were especially religious, but because it was what families did. Community, stability, social participation. My parents weren't ambitious in the conventional sense. They didn't push me toward exceptional achievement or prestigious institutions, but they had absolute faith in a specific worldview. Work hard, follow rules, be respectful, and things work out. Merit matters. Preparation pays off. Systems reward those who engage them properly. I absorbed that completely. I was a good student from the beginning. Not brilliant, but thorough. I did every assignment, studied for every test, asked questions when I didn't understand something. By middle school, I was pulling straight A's, not because I was naturally gifted, but because I understood that achievement was a process. If you broke down what was required and executed systematically, success followed. 8th grade, my English teacher, Mrs. Harrison, mentioned that some of her students had gone to Whitfield Academy. It's quite prestigious, she said. Very rigorous academically, beautiful campus. Of course, the tuition is... She trailed off diplomatically. I went home and researched it. Whitfield Academy. Founded 1887, independent college preparatory school, grades 9 through 12. Current enrollment 847 students. Acceptance rate 23%. Average SAT scores in the 95th percentile. 98% four-year college placement with significant representation at Ivy League and equivalent institutions. The tuition was $42,000 per year. My parents made a combined $110,000. The math didn't work. But the website mentioned merit scholarships. Full tuition awards for exceptional students demonstrating academic excellence and leadership potential. Competitive process, holistic review, limited availability. I decided to try. I spent the fall of 8th grade preparing my application like it was a military campaign. I studied for the entrance exam using prep books from the library. I wrote and rewrote my personal essay 17 times, each draft sharper and more focused than the last. I asked my teachers for recommendations 3 months in advance, so they'd have time to write something substantive. The entrance exam was in January. 3 hours Saturday morning, Whitfield's testing center in a building that looked like a small college. I arrived 30 minutes early, watched other students show up. Some nervous like me, some casual and confident like this was just another Saturday activity between tennis lessons and birthday parties. I scored 97th percentile overall, 99th in verbal reasoning. In March, I won a statewide essay competition sponsored by the Bar Association, $500 and publication in their quarterly journal. The topic was Justice and Equity in American Institutions. I wrote about how procedural fairness creates legitimacy, how systems fail when they're perceived as arbitrary, how transparency and consistency matter more than any individual outcome. I believed every word. My middle school teachers wrote strong recommendations. Mrs. Harrison's letter apparently described me as the most intellectually serious student I've encountered in 23 years of teaching. In April, the acceptance letter arrived. Thick envelope, Whitfield Academy crest embossed on heavy cardstock. Admitted for fall semester. And attached, notification of the Thornton Merit Scholarship. Full tuition, 4-year renewable award, pending academic performance and character standards. My mother cried when we read it. My father shook my hand solemnly, like I'd accomplished something genuinely significant. Maybe I had. I showed up to Whitfield that September convinced I'd earned my place, that merit had been recognized and rewarded, that the system had worked exactly as promised. The campus was 200 acres of manicured lawns, brick buildings with white columns, tree-lined paths, athletic fields that looked like they belonged at a Division I university. The main academic building, Caldwell Hall, no relation to my family, had marble floors and oil portraits of founders in gilded frames. The library was larger than Riverside's public library. The science labs had equipment I'd only seen in university catalogs, and the students. That first week, I learned very quickly that I was different. Not obviously, everyone wore the same uniform, attended the same classes, followed the same schedule. But in 100 small ways, the differences were unmistakable. There was the parking lot, Range Rovers, Mercedes G-Wagons, Tesla Model S sedans, a few BMWs that looked almost modest by comparison. I took the bus. Whitfield provided transportation for scholarship students from various suburbs, a practical necessity they didn't advertise prominently. There were the conversations, casual mentions of summer homes in the Outer Banks, ski trips to Aspen, spring breaks in the Caribbean, not showing off. Exactly, just normal for them. Background noise of their lives. There was the way certain students moved through the hallways, this easy confidence like they owned the space, stopping to talk with teachers like they were family friends, which often they actually were. Their parents served on the board, donated to capital campaigns, attended galas with the headmaster, and there was the way teachers responded differently to different students. Nothing overt, nothing you could point to as evidence, just subtle variations in warmth, in attention, in how much latitude they gave for late assignments or questionable behavior. I noticed all of it. I cataloged it methodically, like data points in a study. But I didn't resent it. Not initially. I thought it was just context to navigate. Every system has internal politics, informal hierarchies, legacy advantages. The key was understanding them and operating effectively anyway. So I focused on what I could control. Academically, I worked harder than probably anyone else in my class. Not because I was competing, Whitfield didn't rank students, but because academic excellence was the foundation of everything. My scholarship was renewable, based on maintaining a 3.7 GPA. I finished freshman year with a 4.0. I joined activities strategically. Not everything, that would seem desperate, but things that interested me and provided visibility. Student council as a class representative. The school newspaper as a staff writer, Model UN, debate club. I showed up consistently, contributed meaningfully, made myself useful. I was respectful to teachers, friendly to classmates, helpful when asked. I learned people's names, remembered details about their lives, demonstrated that I was paying attention. By sophomore year, I had a reputation. Serious, reliable, smart. Not popular in the social hierarchy sense. I wasn't going to parties at Cameron Thornton's family estate or hanging out with the lacrosse team, but respected. Teachers liked me. Fellow scholarship students saw me as someone who was making it work. I started to feel like I belonged. Looking back now, I think that was when the real danger began. Not the initial otherness, which I'd understood and accepted, but the gradual belief that I could transcend it, that merit and effort could overcome structural disadvantages, that Whitfield's stated values, excellence, integrity, leadership, actually governed how opportunity was distributed. Junior year, I started paying closer attention to student government. The student body president that year was Sebastian Whitmore, son of the English department chair. Sebastian was fine, charming in a polished way, good at public speaking, comfortable in front of adults. He'd been elected the previous spring with a campaign focused on Whitfield pride and tradition with innovation, whatever that meant. I attended student council meetings semi-regularly. They met every other Wednesday in a conference room in the administrative building. 10 elected representatives, plus Sebastian and his vice president, Natalie Harlow, daughter of the assistant headmaster. The meetings were underwhelming. Typical agenda: approve minutes from the last meeting, discuss upcoming dances or spirit weeks, rubber stamp budget allocations that the administration had already decided, listen to Sebastian report on his meetings with the headmaster. There was no real governance, no policy development, no student advocacy, no meaningful engagement with how the school actually operated. It was theater, giving students the appearance of participation while keeping actual power firmly with the administration. I remember sitting in the back of one meeting, watching Sebastian lead a discussion about whether homecoming should have a Hollywood glamour or Enchanted Garden theme, and thinking, this position could actually matter. Someone just needs to take it seriously. That thought became an obsession. I started researching student government structures at peer institutions. Andover had a student congress with actual committee systems. Exeter's student council participated in faculty meetings with voting rights on specific issues. Several top public magnates had student ombudsmen who could appeal disciplinary decisions. Whitfield's student government did none of that. It existed to plan social events and provide photo opportunities when the headmaster needed to demonstrate student voice to parents or accreditation committees. But the governing documents, I found them in the library's archive, actually granted student council broader authority. The language was vague enough to be interpreted expansively if someone wanted to, representing student interests in all matters affecting student life and experience, serving as liaison between student body and administration, participating in the development of policies impacting the school community. What if someone actually used that language? What if student government became more than ceremonial? Over the summer between junior and senior year, I developed a complete platform, not campaign slogans, actual policy proposals. First, reforming the disciplinary system. Currently, students accused of violations faced a disciplinary committee with no guaranteed representation, no clear evidentiary standards, no appeals process beyond the headmaster's discretion. I proposed a student advocate system where trained peer representatives could assist accused students in presenting their cases. Second, budget transparency. Student activity fees totaled over $300,000 annually, but there was no public accounting of how that money was spent. I drafted a proposal for quarterly budget reports accessible to all students, showing exactly where money went and allowing student input on allocation priorities. Third, curriculum input. Currently, course offerings were determined entirely by department chairs and administration. I wanted to create a student advisory committee that could propose new courses, suggest modifications to existing ones, and provide systematic feedback on teaching effectiveness. Fourth, expanded mental health resources. Whitfield had one counselor for 847 students. The wait time for appointments during high-stress periods was 3 weeks. I researched peer-institution ratios, developed a proposal for 2 additional counselors, funded through reallocation of other administrative costs, and outlined a peer support training program. Fifth, community service integration. Whitfield required 40 hours of community service for graduation, but had no infrastructure supporting students in finding meaningful opportunities. I proposed a centralized clearinghouse, partnerships with local nonprofits, and reflection components that would make service learning rather than box checking. By August, I had a 47-page platform document. Each proposal included rationale, implementation timeline, resource requirements, anticipated challenges, success metrics, and case studies from peer institutions. My parents thought I was overdoing it. "Maxwell, honey, it's student council," my mother said, watching me work on layouts at the kitchen table. "It's wonderful that you're taking it seriously, but what? It's also okay to just participate. You don't have to reinvent everything." "I'm not trying to reinvent it. I'm trying to make it functional." My father looked up from his newspaper. "What happens if you don't win?" I hadn't seriously considered that possibility. "Then someone else implements some of these ideas. That's fine. It's about improving the school, not about me." He exchanged a glance with my mother that I didn't understand then. School started the Tuesday after Labor Day. I was ready. The election timeline was posted the first week. Candidates announced in early October, 6-week campaign period. Presentations to the student body in mid-November, followed by a debate, then interviews with the selection committee. Final decision announced before Thanksgiving break. 3 other people declared candidacy in the first week. Brielle Langston, editor of the yearbook. Smart, personable, involved in everything. Her campaign would focus on community building and inclusive excellence. She had strong support among the art students and the social elite. She knew everyone, remembered everyone's names, made people feel important. Dominic Bennett, captain of the debate team. Brilliant, intense, ideologically committed to student empowerment. His platform would be more radical than mine. He'd argue for fundamental restructuring of how Whitfield governed itself. He had support among the politically engaged students. the ones who read theory and argued about institutional power. And then there was Harrison Prescott. Harrison transferred to Whitfield at the start of senior year. New, family in town, new money, though new is relative when you're talking about the kind of wealth the Prescotts had. His father, Richard Prescott, was a commercial real estate developer. Not local properties, major projects, downtown office towers, suburban corporate campuses, mixed-use developments that reshape neighborhoods. The kind of developer who dealt with city councils and investment banks, and had enough capital to wait out recessions. The Prescotts had moved from Connecticut. Harrison had been at Choate, apparently, though I never confirmed that. Richard was expanding into our region, and the family relocated to be closer to his new projects. Harrison was everything I wasn't. Tall, 6'2" probably, with an athletic build from years of competitive sailing and tennis. Dark hair always perfectly styled. Expensive clothes that fit so well you barely noticed them. This easy physical confidence that made him comfortable in any space. But it wasn't just appearance, it was how he moved through the world. He introduced himself to everyone in the first week. He joined 3 clubs immediately. He volunteered for student council projects, showed up at football games, made conversation with teachers like he'd known them for years. He was effortlessly charismatic in a way I'd never be. When he talked to you, he made eye contact just the right amount, smiled at the right moments, seemed genuinely interested in whatever you were saying. People left conversations with Harrison feeling good about themselves. Within a month, he announced he was running for student body president. I wasn't initially concerned. I had the policy platform. I had student support built over 3 years. I had teacher advocates who'd seen my work. Harrison was charming, sure, but he'd just arrived. How could he possibly understand Whitfield's needs better than someone who'd been there since freshman year? The campaign period was intense. We each got to make a presentation to the full student body, all 4 candidates, back to back in the auditorium during a special assembly. I went third. I had a PowerPoint. Professionally designed, clear graphics, concise bullet points. I walked through my top 5 proposals, explaining not just what I wanted to do, but how, with specific mechanisms and realistic timelines. I talked about the disciplinary reform proposal. Right now, if you're accused of violating the honor code, you face a committee with no guaranteed support, no clear standards for evidence, no meaningful appeals process. That's not justice. That's arbitrary authority. I'm proposing a student advocate system, trained peer representatives who can help students navigate the process, ensuring everyone gets a fair hearing. I presented data on budget transparency. Last year, students paid over $300,000 in activity fees. Can anyone in this room tell me exactly how that money was spent? No? That's a problem. Transparency creates accountability. I want quarterly reports, accessible to everyone, showing where every dollar goes. I outlined the mental health proposal. 1 counselor for 847 students means if you're struggling, you wait weeks for help. That's unacceptable. Other schools have ratios of 1 to 300. We can do that too, and I have a budget plan that makes it work. The applause after my presentation was solid, respectful. I saw teachers nodding. Students I'd interviewed for my platform research seemed pleased to see their concerns represented. I felt good. Not triumphant, but confident. I'd done the work. I'd presented a serious, substantive vision. Now the decision was up to the community. Then Harrison presented. He didn't have a PowerPoint. He stood center stage with a handheld microphone, made eye contact with different sections of the auditorium, and talked. I've only been at Whitfield for 2 months, he started, but I already love this place. The tradition, the excellence, the way everyone here pushes each other to be better. My first week, I felt so welcomed. People introduced themselves, invited me to join things, made me feel like I belonged. He paused. Let that settle. But I also heard from students who don't feel that way, who feel isolated or stressed, or like they're just getting through rather than thriving. And I thought, what if student government's job wasn't just to plan events or manage budgets, important as those are, but to make sure every single student at Whitfield feels the way I felt that first week? Welcomed, valued, part of something bigger than themselves. He talked about building community, about Whitfield pride that comes from genuine connection, not just tradition, about creating spaces where everyone can contribute their unique perspective. It was vague, aspirational rather than specific. No implementation details, no timelines, no concrete mechanisms, but people responded. The applause was warmer than mine had been. Longer. When he finished, students were smiling, nodding, leaning toward each other to comment. I sat in my seat, portfolio in my lap, and felt the first whisper of doubt. The debate was the following week. Moderated format. Questions from a student journalist panel. Candidates at podiums on the auditorium stage. The questions were predictable. How would you improve communication between students and administration? What's your top priority if elected? How would you handle disagreement within student council? I gave specific, policy-focused answers. Dominic gave theoretical, systems critique answers. Brielle gave warm, community-focused answers. Harrison gave vision. When asked about his top priority, he didn't choose one of my policy proposals or Dominic's structural reforms. He talked about culture change. I think our top priority should be making Whitfield a place where every student, not just the ones who are already confident and connected, feels empowered to contribute. That means listening more than talking. It means creating opportunities for voices we haven't heard yet. It means measuring our success not by what we accomplish, but by how many people we bring along. The moderator pressed him. That's inspiring, but what specific actions would you take? Great question. First, I'd expand student council to include more representatives from different groups. Not just class officers, but representatives from clubs, activities, different social circles. Second, I'd create regular town halls where any student can bring concerns directly to council without going through formal channels. Third, I'd make our meetings transparent, open to any student who wants to attend, with minutes published online. None of that was in his written platform. He was improvising, and it sounded good. I responded in my next turn. Those are interesting ideas, but they don't address the structural issues limiting student government's effectiveness. Expanding council without expanding our actual authority just means more people participating in a ceremonial body. We need to. I think that's where we differ. Harrison interrupted smoothly. Not rudely, just conversationally. Maxwell sees this as a structural problem requiring structural solutions. I see it as a cultural opportunity. You can have all the formal authority in the world, but if students don't feel invested, don't feel heard, it doesn't matter. The audience responded to that. I saw heads nodding. The debate continued. I won on specifics, on detailed knowledge, on policy substance. Harrison won on connection, on vision, on making people feel something. Afterward, friends told me I'd done well. You definitely know more, one said. Your proposals are way more developed, another added. Their compliments felt like consolation prizes. The final component was the selection committee interview. 7 people would interview all 4 candidates. 3 faculty members selected by the headmaster, 2 administrators, the outgoing student body president, and 1 board member. They'd deliberate and announce their choice. This was the most heavily weighted component. 60% of the final decision, with student presentations and debate making up the remaining 40%. I prepared for 2 weeks. I anticipated every possible question. I created supplemental materials, budget spreadsheets, implementation timeline graphics, case studies from peer institutions printed on heavy cardstock. I practiced with Mrs. Whitmore, my English teacher, who helped me refine my delivery, soften my tone, make eye contact more naturally. I bought a new suit for the interview. Nothing expensive, my parents couldn't afford that, but clean, professional, properly fitted. My mother helped me pick it out, made sure the shirt was pressed perfectly, the tie properly knotted. The interview was scheduled for November 14th. 3:45 p.m. I arrived at 3:15. Sat in the hallway outside the conference room, reviewed my notes one final time, tried to calm the nervous energy that made my hands slightly unsteady. At 3:43, the previous candidate, Brielle, emerged. She smiled at me, wished me luck. She looked relaxed. At 3:45 exactly, the door opened. Eleanor Harlow, the assistant headmaster, invited me in. The conference room was formal. Large table, high-backed chairs, tall windows with afternoon light streaming through. 7 people sat along one side of the table. Mrs. Whitmore, English Department Chair, Mr. Langston, History, Dr. Bennett, College Counselor, Miss Harlow, Assistant Headmaster, Dean Callahan, Student Affairs, Mr. Thornton, Development Office, and Sebastian Whitmore, Outgoing President. I sat across from them, portfolio centered in front of me, tried to project calm confidence. Mrs. Whitmore started with warm-up questions. Why did I want this position? What did I see as student government's primary role? I gave clear, substantive answers, referenced my platform, cited specific examples. Mr. Langston asked about my policy proposals. This was comfortable territory. I walked through my top 3 priorities: disciplinary reform, budget transparency, mental health resources, explained implementation steps, referenced successful models from other schools. They seemed engaged, taking notes, nodding along. Dean Callahan asked how I'd handle disagreement between students and administration. I see student government as a bridge, I said. Our job isn't to be adversarial, it's to facilitate dialogue. When there's disagreement, my approach would be to first understand the administration's perspective and constraints, then present student concerns in a way that acknowledges those constraints while still advocating for student needs. Finding common ground requires respecting both perspectives. More nods. Sebastian smiled slightly. The interview was going well. I could feel it. My preparation was paying off. They were responding positively to my substance, my thoroughness. Then Ms. Harlow shifted in her seat and asked, "Maxwell, how would you describe your leadership style?" Standard question. I'd prepared for it. I'd describe my style as collaborative and data-driven. I believe in bringing diverse voices to the table, making decisions based on evidence rather than assumptions, and creating sustainable systems that outlast any individual leader. Leadership isn't about personal charisma. It's about building infrastructure that empowers everyone to contribute. She nodded slowly. That's very thorough. But tell me, how do you think students and faculty perceive you? Not your ideas, but you personally. The room's temperature shifted subtly. I think they see me as hardworking, I said carefully. Reliable. Someone who follows through on commitments. Of course, she said. Your work ethic is exemplary. No one questions that. She paused, chose her next words deliberately. But leadership at Whitfield, especially in a representative role like student body president, requires a certain presence, a way of commanding a room, of inspiring people, of representing the school to external stakeholders. I felt my prepared responses becoming inadequate. I believe my track record demonstrates Your track record is excellent, Mr. Thornton interrupted. Not unkindly, but firmly. Truly. But this position involves more than executing tasks efficiently. You'll be the face of our student body at donor events, alumni gatherings, board meetings. You'll be photographed for our website, featured in promotional materials, introduced to prospective families during campus tours. He leaned forward slightly. This role requires someone who can walk into a room of wealthy donors or influential board members and naturally command their respect. Someone who can represent Whitfield's image, our brand, to the people who sustain this institution. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understood perfectly, Mrs. Whitmore added, softer. What we're trying to understand, Maxwell, is how you see yourself fitting into that representational role. Your policy work is impressive, but can you help us visualize you in those external-facing situations? My mind raced. How to answer this? How to demonstrate presence when the question itself implied I lacked it? I'm confident I can represent Whitfield professionally and effectively, I said. My communication skills are strong. I'm comfortable with public speaking, and I'm capable of adapting to different contexts. It's not just communication, Dean Callahan interrupted. It's gravitas, natural authority, the ability to walk into a room and have people immediately take you seriously. Some people have that quality innately. It's not a criticism to acknowledge that different people bring different strengths. Mr. Langston jumped in, trying to be helpful. Maxwell, let me ask differently. Harrison Prescott, he's new here, but he has a certain ease in social situations, a natural confidence. When he's in a room with adults, with authority figures, there's an immediate rapport. Do you feel you have that same quality? The subtext was crushing. You don't. We can all see that you don't. Can you see it too? I think, I said slowly, that confidence and competence are related but distinct qualities. I may not have Harrison's natural social ease, but I have depth of knowledge, commitment to substance, and demonstrated ability to deliver results. Ms. Harlow nodded. Absolutely, and those are valuable qualities. But for this particular role, at this particular time, with the external demands we're facing, significant donor cultivation, board relations, public representation, we need to consider which qualities are most critical. The rest of the interview was shorter than I'd expected. They asked a few more questions. How would you handle a crisis? What's your vision for the next year? But the energy had fundamentally shifted. They were polite, professional, but something had been decided. When Ms. Harlow thanked me for my time and said they'd be in touch, I knew. I left the administrative building in a daze. The November air was cold, sharp, but I barely registered it. I walked to the parking lot, sat in my car, 12-year-old Toyota Camry, inherited from my grandmother, and stared at the steering wheel. They hadn't rejected my ideas. They'd rejected me. Not my qualifications, not my preparation, not my vision or work ethic or commitment. They'd rejected who I fundamentally was, how I presented. My lack of presence, my inability to naturally command a room of wealthy donors. I sat there for 20 minutes, maybe longer, watching students leave the building, head to sports practices or club meetings or their cars. Normal late afternoon at Whitfield, for everyone, except me. 2 days later, they announced Harrison Prescott as the next student body president. The announcement came during Friday assembly. The headmaster, Dr. Montgomery, made it personally. After a thorough selection process, the committee has chosen someone who embodies Whitfield's values of leadership, community, and service. Someone who brings natural charisma, exceptional interpersonal skills, and the ability to represent our school with distinction to our broader community of stakeholders, alumni, and supporters. Please join me in congratulating Harrison Prescott as your next student body president. The applause was enthusiastic. Harrison walked to the stage, shook Dr. Montgomery's hand, stood at the podium. "I'm incredibly honored," he said. "This school has given me so much in just a few months, and I'm excited to give back. My door will always be open. My commitment is to serve every student, to listen more than I talk, and to make Whitfield a place we're all proud to be part of." More applause. I sat in the back of the auditorium and felt something crystallize inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder. A fundamental understanding shifting into place. The world didn't work the way I'd believed. Merit mattered, sure. Preparation mattered. Substance mattered. But they weren't enough. What mattered, what really determined outcomes, was perception. Image. The ability to perform privilege naturally enough that institutions saw you as safe, as aligned with their brand, as someone who could represent them to the people who sustained them. I didn't have that. I was the scholarship kid from Riverside, son of an accountant and an elementary school teacher, someone who wore suits from department stores and arrived to school on a bus. I could work twice as hard. I could be twice as prepared. I could have better ideas, deeper knowledge, more thorough vision. It didn't matter. They'd chosen the wealthy, charismatic son of a major developer because that's what their institution valued. Not explicitly, not in writing, but in practice, in the decision that mattered. After the assembly, friends offered condolences. "You were way more qualified," Cameron Mercer said, catching up with me in the hallway. "Everyone knows you would have been better at the actual job," Natalie added. "Harrison just has that thing, you know," someone else said. "It's not fair, but—" Their sympathy made it worse. The implicit agreement that I'd been robbed, that the decision was unjust, but also inevitable. Of course they chose Harrison. Look at him, look at his family, look at how he carries himself. Of course they didn't choose me. I should have accepted it. Should have focused on the rest of senior year, on college, on moving forward. The election was over. Continuing to dwell on it would only make things harder. But I couldn't let it go. Something in me insisted that the decision violated stated principles. The selection criteria, published in student handbooks, posted on the student council website, explicitly emphasized demonstrated leadership experience, clear policy vision, and student support. By those criteria, I should have won. I had 3 years of leadership experience. I had the most developed policy vision by far. I had strong student support across multiple constituencies. Harrison had charm and a famous last name. So I filed an appeal. I spent a weekend drafting it. 5 pages, carefully reasoned, professionally formatted. I didn't accuse anyone of bias. I didn't make it personal. I simply pointed out the inconsistency between stated criteria and actual outcome. I cited the published standards. I referenced my qualifications relative to those standards. I noted that while the committee had broad discretion, that discretion should align with institutional values of merit and fairness. I requested that the decision be reviewed by an independent party or that the selection process be repeated with revised criteria that explicitly included presence and external representation if those factors were determinative. I submitted it to Dr. Montgomery's office Monday morning. Wednesday afternoon, his assistant called. "Dr. Montgomery would like to meet with you. Are you available Thursday during lunch?" I was available. Thursday at 12:15, I sat in the headmaster's office for the first time. Wood paneling, leather furniture, oil paintings of previous headmasters, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with hardcover books that looked more decorative than functional. Dr. Montgomery sat behind an enormous desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, my appeal document in front of him. He was in his mid-60s, gray hair perfectly styled, expensive suit, the kind of calm authority that came from 30 years managing wealthy parents and larger budgets. "Maxwell," he said, looking up, "thank you for coming." I sat across from him, tried to match his calm professionalism. "I've read your appeal. It's well written, thoroughly reasoned. Exactly the kind of thinking that makes you an exceptional student." He paused. "But I'm afraid the committee's decision is final. The published criteria—" He held up a hand gently. "I understand your concern, but the criteria you're referencing are guidelines, Maxwell, not binding contracts. The selection committee has broad discretion to weigh multiple factors, some of them necessarily subjective. So, presence outweighs demonstrated qualifications?" He set down his glasses, looked at me directly. "I'm going to be candid with you because I think you're mature enough to hear this. Leadership isn't just about policy proposals or organizational skills. It's about inspiring confidence, representing an institution to the world, embodying values that attract support and resources." He leaned back in his chair. "Harrison Prescott has qualities that our board members, our major donors, our alumni network respond to, not just his family connections, though I won't pretend those are irrelevant, but his personal presence, the way he carries himself, the ease with which he navigates professional social situations." "His privilege, you mean?" Dr. Montgomery's expression hardened slightly. "That's an oversimplification and beneath you. Harrison is a talented young man in his own right. But yes, his background is relevant. The student body president will interact with board members who move in those circles. Having someone who understands that world, who can navigate it naturally, is valuable to this institution." He stood, signaling the meeting was ending. "I encourage you to focus on your remaining time at Whitfield. You've been accepted to an excellent university. You have a bright future ahead. Don't let disappointment over one high school election affect your trajectory." I left his office knowing two things with absolute certainty. First, my appeal was dead. Second, this conversation would have consequences I couldn't yet see. The rest of November passed. Harrison transitioned into his role, started attending meetings with Dr. Montgomery, planning for spring semester initiatives. I fulfilled my obligations, classes, activities, college applications. But I felt detached, like I was observing my own life from a distance. December and January were college application season. Most of my applications had been submitted before the election. Early decision to a good private university, early action to several public honors colleges, rolling admissions to safety schools. My early decision school accepted me in mid-December. Solid academics, good reputation, substantial merit scholarship. My future was secure, but a few regular decision schools still required final senior year updates and recommendation letters from counselors. In early March, Mr. Gallagher caught me after calculus class. "Maxwell, do you have a minute?" We stepped into the hallway. He looked uncomfortable. "I want you to know I wrote you a strong recommendation," he said. "You're one of the best students I've taught in 15 years. "Thank you. But I heard from a colleague at Pemberton, they were comparing notes on applicants, that Dr. Bennett's letter for you had some concerning phrasing." My stomach dropped. Dr. Bennett was the college counselor. He wrote the institutional recommendation that went to every school. "Concerning how?" Mr. Gallagher chose his words carefully. "Apparently there was language about you having difficulty accepting institutional decisions. Something about struggling with outcomes that didn't align with your expectations." He watched my reaction. "I don't know if that's accurate. I haven't seen the letter directly, but I wanted you to be aware." I thanked him mechanically and left school early. I sat in my car in the parking lot, same spot where I'd sat after the interview. Felt the same helpless rage, except now it was colder, more final. They hadn't just rejected me for student body president. They'd punished me for appealing. They'd coded me as difficult, as someone who couldn't accept authority, as a problem student, and they'd embedded that characterization in confidential documents that would follow me to universities across the country. I got into my early decision school before any of this. but several regular decision schools where I should have been an easy admit. Schools where my grades and test scores were well above their 75th percentile rejected me. I'd never know for certain if Dr. Bennett's recommendation was the reason. But the timing was clear. The punishment for challenging institutional decisions was institutional retaliation. The rest of senior year passed in numbness. I showed up to classes, maintained my grades, participated in activities. But mentally I was elsewhere. Friends noticed. "You've been different since the election, Catherine," Whitaker said at lunch one day. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't seem fine." "I'm focused on next year, college, moving forward." She didn't push, but I could see she didn't believe me. Harrison did fine as student body president. He planned nice events, improved homecoming, better senior week activities, well-attended town halls. He gave good speeches at assemblies. He smiled in photographs next to donors at fundraising events. Exactly what they'd wanted. At graduation in May, I sat in my assigned seat, wore the same robe as everyone else, listened to Dr. Montgomery's address about Whitfield graduates carrying our values of excellence and leadership into the world. Harrison received special recognition for his service as student body president. The headmaster praised his exceptional ability to bring our community together and represent Whitfield with distinction. I accepted my diploma, shook hands, smiled for my parents' photos, and then I left. I spent the summer working at my father's firm. Data entry, basic bookkeeping, office administration. Mindless work that paid minimum wage and let me save some money for college expenses. My parents were excited for me. "A fresh start," my mother said. "You're going to do great things." I nodded, smiled, said the right things, but inside, I was different. I understood now that the world didn't work the way I'd believed. Merit mattered, but it wasn't enough. Preparation wasn't enough. Substance wasn't enough. What mattered was perception, control, the ability to shape how others saw you, how they valued you, how they responded to your presence. I didn't have that naturally. Fine, I'd build it, but I'd build it on my own terms. Outside institutions that could reject me for not fitting their aesthetic preferences. I arrived at college that fall with specific clarity. The university was good. Top 100 nationally, solid programs, decent reputation, not elite, not prestigious, but legitimate. I had a merit scholarship covering tuition, room and board, through resident advisor work, books and expenses from summer savings. Freshman year, I kept my head down. Academically, I aimed for good grades, but not perfection. 3.7 GPA, respectable but not consuming. I wasn't competing anymore. Competition required caring about institutional validation. I joined a few clubs, attended some social events, made casual friends. Surface-level engagement, friendly but not close. Mostly I observed. I watched how different people operated. The guys who commanded social situations, what did they do differently? The women who could redirect group dynamics with a few words, what skills were they demonstrating? The professors who held entire lecture halls captivated. What techniques made them effective? I started reading obsessively, not textbooks, books on influence, persuasion, presence, body language. Robert Cialdini's work on persuasion psychology, Malcolm Gladwell on social dynamics, old classics like Dale Carnegie, and more recent work on nonverbal communication. I studied how power actually worked, not theoretical power from political science courses, but practical, interpersonal power, how certain people got opportunities others didn't, how networks formed, how perception became reality. I took notes, kept journals, analyzed interactions like case studies. Sophomore year, I discovered economics. I'd always been good at math. Quantitative thinking came naturally. But an elective microeconomics course revealed something more interesting. I had an aptitude for pattern recognition in markets, not just understanding supply and demand curves or equilibrium models, but seeing inefficiencies, identifying value gaps, recognizing when prices didn't reflect underlying fundamentals. I started following financial news, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Financial Times. I read annual reports from public companies, analyzed quarterly earnings, tracked market movements. I opened a small brokerage account with $800 I'd saved from my RA stipend. Started making small trades, nothing sophisticated, just practicing with real stakes. I lost money initially, made bad calls, overcorrected, let emotions drive decisions. But I tracked everything meticulously, analyzed mistakes, adjusted my approach. By the end of sophomore year, my $800 account was worth $1,300. Not impressive in absolute terms, but a 60% return in 10 months. More importantly, I was learning how money worked as a tool, as leverage, as a source of independence. Junior year, I added more capital and expanded my strategy. I focused on small-cap companies with solid fundamentals but poor investor relations. Family businesses transitioning to professional management. Commercial real estate in secondary markets. The pattern I'd identified at Whitfield repeated everywhere. Value was often dismissed because it didn't present correctly. A profitable manufacturer with an outdated website and no PR strategy. A successful immigrant entrepreneur who couldn't pitch effectively to white-collar investors. Real assets performing well but looking unsophisticated. I became good at finding those gaps. I also started deliberately working on my presentation. I joined the public speaking club. I volunteered to give presentations in classes where it was optional. I practiced in front of mirrors, recorded myself, analyzed every gesture, every pause, every inflection. It felt artificial at first, performative, but gradually it became natural, or at least indistinguishable from natural. I learned to make eye contact in a way that conveyed confidence without aggression. I learned to moderate my voice to command attention without seeming forceful. I learned to dress in a way that communicated competence without trying too hard. I learned presence, not because I'd been born with it, because I'd studied it, practiced it, built it deliberately. The irony wasn't lost on me. The skill Whitfield's committee said I lacked, I was now mastering through pure, methodical effort. Senior year, I met Professor Whitaker. Dr. Alexander Whitaker taught a seminar called Organizational Behavior and Institutional Power. It wasn't popular, too theoretical, too cynical for most business majors who wanted practical career skills. But I found it fascinating. Dr. Whitaker had spent 20 years in management consulting before academia. He'd advised Fortune 500 companies on restructuring, culture change, leadership development. He understood how institutions actually operated versus how they claimed to operate. His lectures dissected organizational politics, informal power structures, the gap between stated values and revealed preferences. After one particularly sharp class on how elite institutions perpetuate inequality while claiming meritocracy, I approached him. Dr. Whitaker, do you have time for coffee sometime? I'd like to discuss some of these concepts in more depth. He looked at me appraisingly. Most students find this material uncomfortable. You seem engaged with it. I've experienced some of these dynamics personally. Then yes, let's talk. We met the following week at a coffee shop near campus. I told him about Whitfield, not for sympathy, just as a case study. He listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, then said, "You learned a valuable lesson earlier than most people do. Institutions don't exist to reward merit. They exist to perpetuate themselves. They value whatever sustains their reputation, their funding, their relationships with power. So what's the alternative? Build your own institution, or at minimum, build independence from institutions that can reject you. Become valuable in ways that can't be dismissed by arbitrary aesthetic judgments. He sipped his coffee. The students I've taught who achieve the most meaningful success, not just wealth, but autonomy and impact, are usually the ones who were rejected by traditional institutions early. Not accepted reluctantly, but actually rejected. It forces a clarity that privileged students never develop. Clarity about what? About where real power comes from. About the difference between institutional validation and actual capability. About building value that exists independent of anyone's approval. That conversation shifted something fundamental. I'd been building skills and knowledge almost defensively, proving I wasn't lacking, compensating for rejection. But Dr. Whitaker reframed it. I could build something affirmatively, something independent, something that didn't require institutional blessing. After graduation, I moved to a mid-sized city about 4 hours from where I'd grown up. Not a major financial hub, but a growing regional economy with an emerging finance sector. I worked at a regional investment advisory firm called Mercer & Associates. Entry-level analyst position, $45,000 a year, long hours doing grunt work. But I learned the industry from the inside. I built relationships with clients. I understood their needs, their risk tolerance, their goals. I saw where the firm underserved them. Generic portfolios, limited communication, inadequate attention to individual situations. The firm's managing partners, Cameron Mercer and his brother Dominic, were competent but conservative. They managed money safely, charged reasonable fees, provided adequate returns. But they didn't innovate, didn't look for unconventional opportunities, didn't challenge assumptions. I worked there for 3 years, learned everything I could, built a client base of people who specifically requested to work with me. In my spare time, late evenings, weekends, I developed my own approach. I focused on overlooked opportunities. The pattern from college repeated at scale. Value dismissed for not presenting correctly. Small cap, companies with excellent fundamentals but outdated branding. Family businesses planning succession without sophisticated advisory support. Commercial real estate in secondary markets that institutional investors ignored. I became good at finding those gaps and bridging them. At 26, I left Mercer & Associates and started my own advisory. Just me. A rented office in a modest building downtown. 5 clients who'd worked with me at the previous firm and wanted to continue. I called it Caldwell Advisory. Simple, professional, unpretentious. The first 2 years were precarious. I had to constantly prove myself. Why should anyone trust a 26-year-old without institutional backing? Why choose an independent advisor over established firms with decades of track record? I competed on performance. I made my clients money consistently. I outperformed larger firms. I provided personal attention they couldn't get elsewhere. I was available when they needed me, responsive to their concerns, transparent about strategies and risks. Word spread slowly. By 28, I had 12 clients and $200 million in assets under management. I hired my first employee, Natalie Bennett, fresh MBA, sharp analytical mind, willing to work for equity stake in a growing firm. By 30, I had 15 employees, clients across 3 states, assets under management approaching $1 billion. I'd built something real, not flashy, not famous, but substantial and profitable. More importantly, I'd built it without asking permission from anyone. Around age 31, I started getting invited to speak at industry conferences. Small sessions initially, panel discussions at regional events, workshop presentations at professional associations. I talked about identifying overlooked opportunities, about looking beyond conventional metrics and peer validation. After one conference in Chicago, an attendee approached me. Eleanor Langston, mid-50s, professional, presence consultant. "You have a natural teaching ability," she said. "The way you explain why people miss obvious opportunities, that's rare. Most experts explain what to do. You explain why people resist seeing what's in front of them." We talked for an hour. She ran a leadership coaching firm, worked with executives and professionals on strategic communication, executive presence, influence skills. "You should consider offering something similar," she said. "You clearly understand these dynamics, and you have credibility. You've built success from scratch. People would listen." That conversation planted a seed. Over the next year, I started offering private consulting on professional presence and strategic communication. Not as a primary business. Caldwell Advisory remained my focus, but as a side project. My clients were exactly who you'd expect. Brilliant engineers who couldn't pitch to investors, talented women dismissed in male-dominated industries, immigrant, professionals with impeccable credentials but accents that made people underestimate them. People who'd been told implicitly or explicitly that they lacked it. I taught them what I'd learned. Presence isn't innate, it's constructed. Every gesture, every word choice, every strategic pause, it can be learned, practiced, weaponized. Eye contact patterns that convey confidence. Vocal modulation that commands attention. Body language that claims space without aggression. Wardrobe choices that signal competence in specific contexts. Strategic narrative construction. How to frame your background as an asset rather than liability. How to control perception. How to make people see value they'd otherwise miss. I didn't do it for money. The fees barely covered costs. I charged only enough to ensure clients took it seriously. I did it because I understood what it felt like to be dismissed for not performing privilege correctly. And I enjoyed teaching people to beat systems that had rejected them. The years accumulated. 32, 35, 40. Caldwell Advisory grew steadily. We managed over $3 billion in assets, employed 40 people, had a reputation for consistent performance and client-focused service. The presence consulting evolved into a more structured program. I partnered with Eleanor Langston, formalized the curriculum, trained additional coaches. I built wealth. Not extravagant wealth. I wasn't taking yachts to the Mediterranean or collecting art, but substantial financial security, a nice house in a good neighborhood, investments that would sustain me indefinitely. I dated occasionally, professional women I met through work or conferences, nothing serious. I enjoyed their company, appreciated their intelligence, but kept everyone at a certain emotional distance. Friends from college drifted away. They'd invite me to weddings, send holiday cards, but gradually those invitations stopped. I was always working, always focused, never quite available for the relationship maintenance that adult friendships require. My parents noticed. They'd visit occasionally. My mother would fuss over my house, comment on how nice everything was, then quietly observe how empty it felt. My father would ask about my personal life, whether I was seeing anyone, whether I was happy. "I'm successful," I'd say. "The business is thriving. I'm helping people. I'm building something meaningful." That's not what I asked. I didn't have better answers. The truth was, I didn't know how to not be intensely focused. The discipline, the control, the relentless drive, it had built everything I had. Relaxing felt like vulnerability. Softening felt like regression to who I'd been at 17. I was 43 years old, financially independent, professionally respected, personally isolated. And then the letter arrived. It came to my office on a Tuesday in October. Thick cardstock envelope, Whitfield Academy crest embossed on the back. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Inside, a formal invitation to join Whitfield Academy's advisory board. The letter was signed by the current headmaster, Dr. Davenport, no relation to the Harrison Prescott I'd known. Davenport was apparently a new headmaster, had been there only 3 years. The invitation praised my exceptional career trajectory and valuable perspective. It described the board's role, advising on strategic priorities, supporting fundraising initiatives, connecting the school with professional networks, meeting schedules, responsibilities, expectations. And there was a second document, a fundraising prospectus for the new Leadership and Innovation Center. $25 million capital campaign, state-of-the-art facilities, programming to develop the next generation of ethical, innovative leaders. The prospectus included suggested contribution levels for board members, starting at $250,000. I sat back in my chair and actually laughed out loud. They wanted to claim me now, after 26 years of silence, after no communication beyond automated alumni newsletters, after dismissing me, punishing me for appealing, coding me as difficult in recommendation letters. Now that I'd built something substantial, now that I had money and professional legitimacy, they wanted it connected to their institution. The advisory board invitation wasn't about my insight or expertise. It was about my potential as a donor and the credibility my success could provide to their fundraising campaign. I set the letter aside. For a week, I thought about how to respond. Part of me wanted to simply decline. Politely, professionally, no explanation. Clean break. Another part considered accepting, playing a long game, join the board, gain influence, create change from within. But that would mean participating in their system, validating it, being photographed next to donors at galas, smiling for marketing materials. Then I had a different idea. What if I didn't decline or accept? What if I created an alternative that implicitly indicted everything they represented? I made some calls, discreet inquiries to people who tracked educational philanthropy, understood nonprofit structures, knew how institutional power worked in elite education. I learned that major donors to private schools typically got naming rights, board positions, influence over policies. Money could reshape institutions or create new ones. So I started my own foundation. I spent 2 months developing it. Mission, structure, programs, funding model. The foundation would support academically exceptional students from modest backgrounds who demonstrated leadership potential but lacked conventional markers of presence, as traditionally defined by elite institutions. Not just scholarship money, strategic support, mentorship from professionals who'd navigated similar obstacles, professional development, workshops, and, critically, training in the skills I'd spent years learning. How to build presence deliberately, how to command rooms, how to translate substance into perception without compromising integrity. I seeded it with $12 million from my personal assets. Established a board, Eleanor Langston, Professor Whitaker, now retired but still sharp, Natalie Bennett from my firm, 2 other professionals I respected. We developed partnerships with public schools, state universities, community colleges, institutions that serve students who'd never get meetings with Whitfield's advisory board. I named it the Prescott Whitfield Foundation, deliberately, ironically, a private joke that made the point explicit. We launched publicly in early December with announcements to educational media, regional press, professional networks. The press release was carefully crafted. Too often, institutions reward style over substance, favor students who already possess social capital, and overlook talented individuals whose only deficiency is not performing privilege correctly. The Prescott Whitfield Foundation exists to prove that presence, gravitas, and leadership capacity can be cultivated deliberately, and that opportunity should flow to those who demonstrate merit, not those who merely present well. I didn't mention Whitfield Academy by name. I didn't need to. Within days, the story circulated in educational circles. Alumni publications picked it up. Someone connected the dots between my history at Whitfield and the Foundation's stated mission. Education Week ran a feature. Investment advisor launches foundation to challenge elite school selection practices. A few journalists reached out, asking if there was a personal story behind the foundation. I declined detailed interviews, but confirmed I'd experienced firsthand how capable students get marginalized by institutions that prioritize aesthetics over substance. The foundation exists to provide students the tools and support to succeed despite those systems, not to reform those systems. That would be a waste of energy. The media attention was moderate but strategic, not viral, not mainstream, but visible within educational philanthropy circles and among people who tracked elite institutions. Exactly what I wanted. Then came the call I'd been expecting. Dr. Davenport, Whitfield's headmaster, requested a meeting. His assistant called my office. Very professional, very cordial. Dr. Davenport would love to discuss the Foundation's mission and explore potential synergies with Whitfield's values. I declined politely. I appreciate the interest, but I'm fully occupied with Foundation launch logistics. He called again personally a week later. Maxwell, I hope you'll reconsider. We admire what you're building. Your perspective would enrich our community. The board invitation stands, of course. Thank you, Dr. Davenport, but I'm committed to existing obligations. A month passed. The Foundation's first cohort of scholarship recipients was announced. 15 students, strong academics, clear leadership potential, diverse backgrounds. We placed them in summer internships, enrolled them in our presence training intensive, connected them with mentors. The outcomes data from our pilot program was strong. Media started covering it more seriously. Then Harrison called. I hadn't heard his voice in 26 years. It was Friday afternoon. I was in my office reviewing portfolios when my assistant transferred a call. Harrison Prescott on line 2. I stared at the phone for several seconds before answering. Maxwell Caldwell. Maxwell, hi, Harrison Prescott. I hope this isn't too out of the blue. His voice was older, but still carried that easy confidence. It's fine. What can I do for you? I'm on Whitfield's board now. Have been for about 6 years. Dr. Davenport mentioned you'd been invited to join us. I wanted to reach out personally. I think it'd be great to have you involved. Straight to business. No preamble about how long it had been. No acknowledgement of our history. I appreciate the call, Harrison, but I'm focused on other projects. Right, the Foundation. I read about it. Really impressive work. Actually, I wondered if there might be ways Whitfield could partner with what you're building. Our resources, your vision, could be powerful. There it was, the pitch. Your work would be more legitimate, more impactful, with Whitfield's institutional backing. The Foundation's mission is pretty specific, I said. We focus on students and institutions underserved by traditional educational philanthropy. Sure, absolutely, but Whitfield serves students from all backgrounds now. Our scholarship programs have expanded significantly. We're up to 30% of students on financial aid. That's good to hear. Though based on the Leadership Center prospectus I received, it seems like the school's priorities remain primarily donor-focused. Brief pause. That's not entirely fair. The Leadership Center would benefit all students. It's about developing skills that I'm sure it would benefit all students, just not the students I'm focused on helping. Longer pause. Maxwell, look, if this is about the election, about what happened senior year, I'd like a chance to talk about that. Clear the air. And there it was. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for 26 years. Harrison, I said, keeping my voice level. I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm not interested in talking about senior year, or joining Whitfield's board, or partnering with the school. I wish you all the best with your fundraising efforts. At least let me buy you lunch. Catch up, no agenda. We're both adults now, both successful. It seems silly to let high school stuff hang over us. The presumption in that sentence, that we were peers, that our successes were equivalent, that I was carrying resentment over high school stuff, rather than having built an entire professional identity around a specific understanding of institutional power, was so perfectly Harrison. I'm going to pass, I said, but thank you for thinking of me. I hung up, sat at my desk for a while, watching afternoon light shift through my office windows. 26 years, and Harrison still didn't understand. It wasn't about resentment. It wasn't about high school stuff. It was about fundamental clarity regarding how institutions distribute opportunity and how to build power independent of their arbitrary judgments. But explaining that to him would have been pointless. The foundation grew rapidly. By year 2, we had a $2.5 million annual budget, partnerships with 23 universities, placement relationships with major employers in finance, tech, consulting. Our success metrics were exceptional. 94% of scholars placed in competitive internships, 89% acceptance rate to top-tier graduate programs, average starting salaries 23% above national averages for similar demographics. We were featured in educational policy journals, cited in research on access and equity. I kept building Caldwell Advisory too. The two streams fed each other. I made money identifying value others missed, then used that money to help people whose value had been missed. The symmetry felt cosmically appropriate. My personal life remained sparse. I dated occasionally, usually professional women I met through work, intelligent, accomplished, interesting, but nothing stuck. I kept everyone at a certain distance, not consciously pushing people away, but also not creating space for deeper connection. Former college friends stopped reaching out. My parents aged, proud of my success, but increasingly worried. You're 45 years old, my mother said during one phone call. You've built this amazing career. When do you get to enjoy it? I am enjoying it. You work 100-hour weeks. I'm working on things that matter to me. Do you have anyone in your life besides work? I didn't have an answer she'd find satisfying. The truth was, I didn't know how to not be intensely disciplined. The control, the focus, the relentless drive. It was who I'd become. Relaxing felt like vulnerability. Letting people close felt like losing the edge that had built everything. Year 6 of the foundation, we held our annual gala fundraiser. Major donors, foundation scholars, program partners, education reporters, 200 people in a nice hotel ballroom downtown. I gave the keynote about students we'd served and the impact they were having. Concrete examples. Brielle from rural Virginia, now at MIT studying aerospace engineering. Cameron from inner-city Detroit, working at Goldman Sachs, sending money home to support younger siblings. Gabrielle from immigrant family in Texas, Yale Law School, full scholarship, real people, real outcomes. The applause was warm and genuine. During the reception afterward, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned. Harrison Prescott stood there. He was 45 now, same as me. Some gray at the temples, slight lines around his eyes, still well dressed in that effortless, expensive way, still projecting that natural confidence. Maxwell, I hope it's okay that I'm here. I bought a ticket through the website. I kept my expression neutral. Of course, we appreciate all supporters. I've been following the Foundation's work, really impressive. The outcomes data especially, those placement rates are remarkable. We're proud of our students. Awkward pause. People circulated around us. conversations overlapping. I could have excused myself. I didn't. "Look," Harrison said, "I know we're not friends. I know there's history. But I wanted you to know I understand what you're doing. With the foundation, with the mission, statement, I get it." "Do you?" "I think so. You're making a point about who gets opportunity and why, about how institutions make those decisions. I'm helping students who need support. That's the entire mission." "Right, of course." He shifted uncomfortably. "Can I ask you something honestly?" I waited. "Do you hate me?" The question surprised me. Not because I hadn't considered it, but because I'd never expected him to ask. "No," I said truthfully. "I don't hate you. I barely think about you." Something flickered across his face. "That election," he continued, "senior year, I know it meant more to you than to me. I know I had advantages you didn't, and I'm sorry if my winning—" "Harrison, stop." He stopped. "You don't need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. You were 17, charismatic, from a wealthy family. The committee chose you for perfectly rational reasons, given their institutional priorities. It wasn't personal. But it affected you, personally. It clarified things for me. That was useful." "Useful," he repeated, not quite believing. "Look, I appreciate you coming tonight. I appreciate the donation, but we don't need to do this conversation. You had a successful high school experience. I had an informative one. We've both moved forward." "Have we? Because it seems like you're still—" He gestured vaguely at the room, the gala, the foundation's stated mission. "Still what?" "Still fighting what happened." I considered that. 26 years later. Standing in a ballroom I'd rented with money I'd earned, surrounded by students whose opportunities I'd helped create. Speaking to the person who'd been chosen over me at 17. Was I still fighting? "I'm not fighting it," I said. "I'm using it. There's a difference." We talked for a few more minutes. Surface conversation. Harrison told me about his life. Married to Brielle Caldwell, the yearbook editor who'd also run for student body president. 2 children, working as executive vice president in his father's company, clearly being groomed to take over eventually. Nice life. Successful by conventional measures. When he excused himself, he shook my hand. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think the committee made a mistake. Not because I did a bad job. I think I did fine, but because you would have been better, more substantive, more impactful." I didn't respond immediately. 26 years earlier, that admission might have meant something. Now it felt irrelevant. "Take care, Harrison." He left. I watched him navigate the crowd toward the exit, still commanding rooms effortlessly, still projecting that natural ease. Some things never changed, but I'd changed. Not just externally, internally. The person who'd sat in that committee room desperate for approval was gone. In his place was someone harder, more controlled, fundamentally less vulnerable to institutional rejection. The cost was isolation, relationships I'd never quite committed to, experiences I'd deferred indefinitely, a certain lightness I'd lost and couldn't recover. Late that night, after the gala ended, after volunteers cleaned up and guests departed, I stood alone in the hotel ballroom, looking at photographs of foundation scholars displayed around the room. Their faces were young, hopeful, determined. They reminded me of myself at 17, before the interview, when I still believed merit was sufficient. I'd given them tools I hadn't possessed, knowledge about how systems actually worked, strategies for navigating institutional bias, resources to build presence deliberately rather than being rejected for lacking it innately. But I'd also given them something else, something I'd never intended, evidence that you can succeed despite rejection, can build meaning despite institutions dismissing you, can transform humiliation into fuel for decades of focused effort. I wondered if that was a gift or a curse, because the truth was I'd won. By every objective measure, I'd vindicated myself. I'd built wealth, influence, impact. I'd created an institution that competed with the one that rejected me. I'd proven that presence could be learned, that substance could be weaponized, that the qualities they'd dismissed as insufficient were actually predictive of achievement. I'd won completely, but I'd also lost something in the winning, some capacity for trust, for vulnerability, for believing institutions could be worth serving, some version of myself that might have built a different life, less successful maybe, but lighter, more open, more connected to other people. I drove home past lit windows of houses where families lived normal lives. I thought about my parents, now in their 70s, still worried about my isolation. I thought about relationships I'd let fade, because maintaining them required energy I'd allocated to building something. And I thought about that committee room, that afternoon light, through tall windows, that moment when Eleanor Harlow said I lacked presence. 26 years later, I could walk into any room and command it. I could make investors listen, could make donors contribute, could make students believe in possibilities, but I couldn't make myself 17 again, believing the world rewarded preparation and merit, trusting that substance was sufficient. That person was gone. The person I'd become had succeeded beyond his imagining, and the victory was hollow in ways I could acknowledge but not heal. I pulled into my driveway. Nice house, good neighborhood, everything I'd worked for, and sat in my car for a while before going inside. Tomorrow I'd wake up at 5:30. I'd exercise, review investment portfolios, respond to foundation emails. I'd be disciplined, productive, successful. I'd continue building what I'd built, helping people who needed help, proving points to audiences who'd long since stopped paying attention, because that's what I did now. It was who I'd become, and I was good at it. But late at night, in quiet moments I didn't share with anyone, I knew the truth. I'd won everything except the ability to feel like winning was enough. That was the cost. The real revenge, if I'm being honest, wasn't building the foundation or declining their board invitation or demonstrating that presence could be manufactured. The real revenge was what that 17-year-old experience did to the rest of my life. How it fundamentally recalibrated my relationship to achievement, to institutions, to other people. How it made success the only acceptable outcome and everything else a potential humiliation to guard against. They'd told me I lacked presence. I'd built presence. I'd built more than that. Wealth, influence, impact, vindication. But somewhere in the building, I'd become someone who couldn't rest, couldn't trust, couldn't believe that being rejected at 17 might have just been 17-year-old. Politics rather than cosmic judgment requiring decades of compensation. I'd let that afternoon define me as completely as if I'd let it defeat me. Different outcome, same fundamental loss of self. That's what I understood now, 45 years old. Sitting alone in my car, successful by every metric, except the ones that matter when you're alone at night. I'd proven them wrong about my capacity for presence, for achievement, for impact. But I'd also proven them right about something they'd never intended. That who you are at 17 determines who you become, whether through validation or rejection, whether by acceptance or refusal. They'd shaped me just as thoroughly through dismissal as they might have through approval. And that realization, understanding that I'd given them that power, that I'd built my entire adult identity around compensating for their assessment, was more painful than the original rejection. Because at least at 17, I could imagine a future where, it wouldn't matter. Now I knew better. It would always matter. The humiliation, the transformation, the hollow victory, it was permanent. I finally went inside. Nice house, quiet rooms, everything exactly as I'd arranged it. Perfect control, complete autonomy, total isolation, exactly what I'd built, exactly what I'd become. Stories like this happen more often than we think. Subscribe if you want to hear the ones that usually stay unspoken. And if this story made you pause, a like helps the channel grow.